Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Tonight, part of our month-long look at Latino images and films, we're focusing on how Hollywood has presented Latinos in Hollywood-made musicals. And with me to help introduce our next movie is Professor and author Chon Noriega, who wrote this fascinating book called Shot in America, Television, the State, and the Rise of Chicano Cinema. Welcome back, Chon.
Thank you, Robert.
Now, the next film Chon and I are going to talk about is the 1961 classic West Side Story. Now, this one easily fits into your theme tonight.
Well, if you're going to have a discussion about Hollywood's portrayal of Puerto Ricans, it has to start with West Side Story. And the unfortunate part is it often ends there, since there have been very few films that have really looked specifically at the Puerto Rican community. This film, of course, is the breakout role for Rita Moreno, who wins an Oscar for that. So on the one hand, there's a very positive aspect to that in terms of her career, which would be stellar. She'd be really one of the few actors who would win an Oscar, an Emmy, a Tony, and a Grammy, let alone as a Latino or Latina actor. But on the other hand, the film very explicitly associates the Puerto Rican community with gang violence, and doesn't really move very far beyond that. And so it's become a kind of a sore point in some ways. And again, not in and of itself, but the fact that there's really no other alternative visions that are put forward.
Right.
In fact, later the same year, the Young Savages would also pretty much do the same, but in black and white and without dancing.
Right, right. So that's the problem here, is the fact that you don't object at all to the subject matter, just the fact that there's no alternates out there.
I think to look at it broadly, yes. The other thing that is problematic is the two main roles, Maria and her brother Bernardo, are both played by white actors. And so it ends up being, in terms of the dynamics of the film, with the exception of Rita Moreno, really another instance of racial or ethnic masquerade among characters.
Right. Interesting movie, though, great movie. Back on Broadway, being done again, so it's kind of an ongoing story that people love.
It's interesting because it has been revived a few times. When it was revived in 1980, they actually cast a Puerto Rican actress, Josie de Guzman. And the funny thing is, when she went in for makeup, they darkened her hair, they darkened her skin. She said, "What is this? I'm Puerto Rican," you know.
Yeah.
And what it says is, you know, Broadway and Hollywood, there's a stereotype or an expectation of what a Latino character is.
Right.
And oftentimes, even Latinos don't match up to that, to those expectations. And
you're not the right type.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's have a look. Here it is, great film, nominated for an impressive 11 Academy Awards, winning 10 of them, including one for Best Picture, for Best Director, 2 awards actually, Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins, and 2 for the supporting performances of George Chakiris and Rita Moreno. Here's West Side Story. Great dancing, great performances, dynamic film. I'm back to talk about it with my co-host for our Latino Images Festival, author Chon Noriega. I have to say, one of the great treats of my life was introducing this film at the Radio City Music Hall in New York, with all 6,200 seats filled, and filled with a lot of Latino people coming to see the film on the big screen at the music hall. And all the cast of the film was there, except for Natalie Wood, of course. All the dancers, and Richard Beamer, and Russ Tamblyn, and George Chakiris, Robert Wise, who directed it. It was just a great treat, because the Latinos in the audience just seemed to go wild with that movie. And it was great fun, that energy and that enthusiasm.
Well, you certainly can't deny the power of Rita Moreno's performance throughout the film, and you can see why she won the Oscar.
Yeah, I'll also, you know, I got to say, George Chakiris was terrific in that film as a dancer, and just the image that he presented. They were all great in it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, it really didn't start out as a story about Puerto Ricans. In 1949, when it was first written, it was called East Side Story, and it was a conflict between Irish Americans and Jewish Americans. And by the time they were adapting it for Broadway in the late 50s, that seemed a little antiquated as a conflict. And it was Leonard Bernstein who said, well, you know, what's happening now is that the Chicano gangs are attacking whites in Los Angeles. And the response to the other producers was, "You're onto something here." And the next thought they had was, well, maybe to focus, bring it back to the East Coast, but to focus on African American, and then settled on Puerto Rican. the group, Puerto Ricans are presented as recent immigrants in the film, but in fact have been in New York since the 19th century and are not immigrants. Technically, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. So in that respect, you could see that they're working with a particular formula and topicality, but not necessarily picking up some of the kind of aspects of the history at that time.
Well, a good choice and, as you said, essential to be talked about in this particular festival that we're doing. So we're going to move on right now. Up next, Diamond Phillips stars in a biopic about legendary Mexican-American recording artist Ritchie Valens.